welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. I am so honored to have our guest join me on the podcast today. Jenn Andreou is someone that I have known for many years. We trained together by the same coach training program, Accomplishment Coaching, and she and I served as mentor coaches together in the program. And I've watched her work and her journey from afar for a while now. And I wanted her to come on the podcast today to have a conversation about grief, because I think that we are living in a world and in a time that is grieving. And for so many of us, we perhaps never developed the tools or the resources or the safe spaces in order to process through our grief and heal from our grief. And you may even notice that there's like a crack in my voice because I actually lost someone very dear to me in the last couple days. And so this conversation just feels so relevant because I think that we're all experiencing the cycle of life in so many aspects of life, in so many parts of the country and the world and the communities that we belong to. And the world needs more hearts with ears, as Jenn so beautifully shares on the podcast today. I think that you will really enjoy today's conversation, and it is such a timely listen. I hope that you take some new tools and resources, and if not, permission to feel, permission to share your hurt and your sorrow and your pain, and the reminder that you're not alone. So a little bit more about our guest. Jenn Andreou is a professional certified coach credentialed through the International Coaching Federation. She's an actualized living coach, founder of Springboard Coaching, and grief recovery method specialist. In her work, she helps grievers who feel stuck in the pain of their losses to move through their grief and take action to regain their well-being. During a successful 25-year career as an advertising executive, Jenn experienced the death of her son, which led her to discover the evidence-based grief recovery method. Today, Jenn helps her clients to heal their hearts and deepen their connections so they can actualize their dreams and live with more joy every day. She coaches executive women through Lumo, serves as a mentor with Onboard, and is also a former ICF Georgia board member. I hope you take from this episode that there are always more hearts with ears available for you. I know I'm taking that with me, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Well, Jenn, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today. I mentioned this just a moment ago before we hit record, but we haven't talked about grief on the show. And I think that we're living in a world that's grieving right now. And for my audience who identify as empathic and highly sensitive, we're particularly susceptible to being highly sensory. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you to share more resources and tools with our listeners to support them in processing their grief and working through it, and maybe developing some muscle, some skill set to um, process pain in perhaps ways that we've never necessarily been taught to do so. So, welcome to the show. And with that, I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself by way of sharing your pronouns with us, and then a little bit about your story, because I think we learn about one another through story.
Well, thanks, Kat. Thanks for having me too. It's very exciting, and I'm honored to be on your podcast. So my name is Jenn Andreou, and I am an actualized living coach and a grief recovery method specialist. So this is a little bit of my journey through today. I grew up in Newington, Connecticut, where I was very close with my mom. But unfortunately, during my college years, my mom died of liver cancer. And I was completely devastated. Like, my mom was my person. But with time, like, I decided after college to move away, relocate. I got a bit of therapy. I just kept busy with things. And in that, like, I always believed that time would heal wounds that I had, and I lived by that. So little did I know that years later down the road, I would get pregnant with a son named Liam. And my husband and I at the time were just thrilled. We were so excited to be new parents to be. And into the pregnancy at 38 weeks, Liam was born, and he was born stillbirth. So here I was again with such devastation after Liam died. And I went to therapy. I joined those groups of other parents that were suffering from the loss of a child. And I even focused on different ways. Like, the Christmas magic elf that you have, I bought one for each of my nieces and nephews, and I named it Elf Liam because I wanted to share him with them as well. But this time it was different for me. So I remember going to work, the grocery store, the gym, all those things that you do daily. And I was just robotic in everything. Like, there was absolutely no joy. And I didn't even know if I would ever get it again either. So somehow I knew that time would not heal these wounds. So if you fast forward 17 years later from that point, I was in a presentation, and this woman was talking about loss. And she was talking about a mother who had a son that died. And all of a sudden, I was in a puddle of tears. And I thought, at the time, that I was doing better. I was remarried to this beautiful man. We were traveling the world. I had a new coaching career. And I got brought back right to that day that Liam died in that presentation. So I composed myself. And after the presentation, I spoke to the woman about the grief recovery method. So I chose to sign up after that. And for the first time in my adult life, I would say that I truly began to heal from the journey, like the loss of my mom, the loss of Liam. And while nothing ever could take away that loss and that pain, the grief recovery method for me showed me how to the emotional healing that of the relationships that ended too soon to me, and how to recover and how to take those first steps to finding my way back to joy. So today I do help moms and daughters and sisters who have experienced loss through recovery to find their way back to the joy that they live every day through the grief recovery method. So I'm super excited to be here today. And, I know this topic is not one that we talk about a lot, and that's another reason I think it's so important to talk about.
I wonder if it's that that very idea that grief isn't something that we talk about, that and how that relates with our inability to heal or process or move through grief. And I so appreciate you sharing that story. I mean, I know we've known each other for a while now, and I knew some of your story. I don't think I had known all of those connection points. Um, so yeah, I mean, how do you kind of experience the ability, the willingness to communicate as part of the journey through grief, through healing, through moving through? Is there a correlation there?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to, take action around it. Like, I feel like we have to go back to when we were little and how we were raised. And we're all raised differently, of course. But I know for me, like, there was a lot of don't feel bad. Like, feeling bad was not something that your parents wanted you to do. So it was either don't feel bad, here's a cookie, or, you could feel good, but you could never feel bad. Like, that was something that we just can't experience and we all know grief is what we're 100% of us are grievers. So we're going to feel bad. So talking about it and normalizing it, that it is perfectly normal to have feelings of loss and grief in all situations when things change, patterns change, when we lose people. And so to me, it's the normalization, the communication about it, because I think a lot of us tend to isolate too around our loss and we don't share it. And that can be too with, learning about grief and knowing that all grievers need is to be heard and listened to and not fixed. And so in that, without analyzing, criticizing, or judging anybody in their grief and just allowing them space to be. And I think that that is really important in communication, is just listening to people, being there for people so they're not isolating, and knowing that it's okay not to be okay and it's okay to feel sad without trying to fix.
So many profound words of wisdom in that share, Jen, like the idea that all we need is to be deeply heard and understood. I think that's so much a part of our work as coaches in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different directions I want to go from everything you've just shared, but I feel like maybe just to put some foundation in place, you could share a little bit about the grief recovery method and what that framework and model looks like. So perhaps we're starting from the same place. So what is the method?
So the method, well, there's a lot of parts to it, right? It's an evidence-based method. So to me, the important parts of it is knowing the tools that you had growing up and using tools that truly help you recover from the loss. I mean, it can be anything. It can be even moving. And so in the grief recovery method, I model everything before I ask you to do any of the exercises. So you hear what you need to do, you read what you need to do, you write what you need to do, and you speak what you need, what your heart needs to feel and be heard. And I think too, grief is emotional, but in society, we treat it as intellectual. And, there's all sorts of things that we say that aren't helpful to people. And so I think with the grief recovery method, we all review relationships at the time and we look at things that we wish were better, different, or more of. And there's always loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. And so the method walks you through those and gets out what your heart needs to say and more about the feelings, right? The emotions around it versus the brain around it. Because I know for me, a lot of people, like I was sharing with somebody that I could tell you exactly, what time Liam died, what day it was, and I could tell you exactly the details of the event. But until I get into how I felt, like how devastated I was, how like the emotions around it, that's where the healing begins. And I think as the society goes, it keeps us in the intellectual and we don't truly get to say what our heart needs to say about how we felt, even now or even then at the time. And that is a huge switch for people when they come through the method of really sharing that 80% feelings versus 20% of event. So it's different in many ways, and I think it opens up people to be like, oh, what a wide range of feelings I do have, and they're not alone. You're in a group, you're not alone, and to know that there is recovery. Because I think the other thing for me, anyways, when I would tell somebody about the death of Liam, people would be like, oh, you never recover from the death of a child. So I lived with that, like, okay, I'm never going to be recovered until I found something that truly let my heart say what it needs to say to somebody that's just a heart with ears. And that's all they are. And they're just listening. And it's so freeing to be in that space and have that safety around your loss and your grief.
You said that it's the work is done in a group, so it's in a in like a container rather than one-on-one support. Is there a reason for the group support versus the one-on-one?
Yes, and can be both. So
Ah,
I
okay.
can do it one on one and I can do it in a group. And I find that most people, it depends on the person because grief is very personal too. So some of them request it be done one on one, but the ones that go to the group too, for me, I learn so much from group. When people share what I can relate to them, the empathy that you have for them and the compassion that you have for them. I find that, the group setting and holding that container and sharing what people are sharing to strangers, they get really close and they, setting up the guidelines within making it safe to share and just be heard. No one's interrupting you. No one's saying, oh, what about that? They're not fixing you. They're just there walking through the same exercises that you're walking through. So yeah, I think the groups are powerful and it's not for everybody. I understand why people do choose the one-on-one.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think when we're learning a new skill set, having someone model it is such an access point to, oh, that's how I share from my feelings. Oh, that's what it means to connect with my heart rather than my intellect.
Yes.
Oh, got it. So you said something that's really sticking with me, and it's the idea that so many of us, when it comes to our relationship to grief, connect with that saying that you shared in the beginning, that time heals all. And um and it, like you said, it doesn't. So how do we discern whether we're healing or something else?
You have to take action and you have to choose to take action in order to heal. And I would put it like if you had a flat tire on the side of the road, like you wouldn't necessarily just wait for air to fill up the tire for you to get back on your way. You might call triple A, you might, go and get some help and roadside assistance. But it's the same thing for grief. Like the time might be a different relationship to the grief. But like I said in my story, like something's going to come up where it's not truly healed and your heart has something to say about it. And so the time to me is then like taking the action. Because I think a lot of people were like, that I talk to in grief, they're like, I'm not ready to dig up all that. It's like, okay, well, then there's something to dig up there, right? And so more time isn't going to make that get any better if you don't take certain actions and steps, which this, shows you the way, which I so appreciate because I didn't know. And then having a tool that can show you how to say what the heart truly needs to say about, your hopes, dreams, and expectations about something that is a loss for you is so important in society. And I think about it with coaching too. You have the companies that they lay off a bunch of people, and one of the perks is, but we're going to get you a coach so you can figure out what's next. And that employee is really upset they might have been working for this company for 10 years and they're not ready for what's next. They're still grieving that loss of what happened. And so I think in society in general, there's very much a disconnect of, we'll just keep going. Like, with time, or even like we're getting the things that you do have, like be grateful for what you have. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't feel the way you feel. And you can't, like, that honesty of those feelings are so important to express.
Yeah, I really appreciate that reminder that um, embracing grief isn't something that is welcomed or embraced in our society. And I think it's as much a reflection of how we were raised as it is a reflection of other people's discomfort with grief.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate this reminder. You've said it now a couple times that if we want to heal, we have to take action. And when I think of action, I mean, I'm very action oriented. I think of, running a marathon and doing reps and cleaning the house, which I did yesterday after my 2.5 week trip abroad. But what I hear you speaking about when you say action is learning how to communicate your feelings from your heart, sharing those unprocessed or undistinguished hopes and dreams and expectations. And so this feels like a very different flavor of action than many of us, I imagine, are comfortable with, practiced in, oriented towards. So, can
Mm-hmm.
you speak a little bit more about how do we take action to heal? What types of action do we need to take to heal? How do we begin?
And in that too, like, I love what you put into about helping others in their grief, right? So in taking action, I always think, I go to the grief recovery method always in taking those actions and, step by step and how to heal and recover from the loss within the method. And learning how to be with people in a healthy way that are going through loss, and just being with people. Like you said, society, it's very uncomfortable for us, and we tend to isolate. We do things which we call short-term energy releasing behaviors. So to me, it's taking action and becoming aware of what the things we do in order to cover up the feelings that we truly are feeling, and not being with the feelings or expressing the feelings. Um, and so, in the world, like short-term energy relieving behaviors, whether it's the workaholism, um, drinking, it can be reading books, fantasy movies, like all of that stuff, eating, all the things that we do to try to cover up what's truly going on, that only releases that pain for a little bit. So even if it's that action of, okay, just becoming aware of it, like, okay, I do this thing when I get upset and when I'm sad, that I go eat a cookie or I go do things, and it's not healthy for me. I can still choose to do it, or I can choose to be with that feeling and express it, and in a safe way. And I say that to, you know, in the recovery method, it's like we become for other participants hearts with ears. And I know that's not every relationship we're in. Like if I called a friend, I know the friend that's going to tell me, what I need to do and give me the list, as opposed to just listen. So having a relationship that you have with someone, of letting them know that you just need to be heard, and listened to. And I think too, a lot of times, when we're not the griever, but we want to help the griever. And, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, with the time heals all wounds, like, oh, they're not ready to go out yet. I think it's too soon. Like you're deciding for somebody else whether it's okay if they're ready to socialize again. And I think it's just allowing them the dignity and respect that they deserve to have that conversation and just be with them. So like those steps, whether it's you as the griever, because I think grievers, are courageous people. And any step, whether you read a book, whether you join a group about grief, whether you're just sharing more emotions, whether you go to something that you didn't want to walk through a room with, like all those things that it's really hard when you're suffering and you have loss that you do are so important. And taking those steps are so important to me.
I'm really, I'm still sitting with this idea of taking action, and I'm hearing in your response like there's a real distinction between the types of actions that speed us up and
Mhm.
distract us or occupy our minds or our time or our bellies or our wallets or and the types and quality of action that slows us down, that allows us to be with other people and other people to be with us, and to maybe go deeper, to go a deeper layer.
I think too, like it brings me back, I think of the myth, like the type of action it takes vulnerability to just be. Like there's not like with somebody, or in a because to me, this is scary work, because it's grief and we don't talk about it. And so it it takes like in some sense it doesn't take much. And in other sense, it takes a lot and a lot of courage to take those steps. Um, I feel like, you know, in the method, like all the steps that we take throughout the method, um, is you're building on recovery of those things and you're taking the action within those things. And a lot of it is the awareness around it, like looking at your loss in your life and all of it and in front of you. Like we don't do that, we barely recognize it even when it comes. And so I think that that is very powerful. Um, and the action to me is just being willing, like being willing. And for your, like the power of taking it, the power of choice, but in your well-being too, of knowing that, yeah, it's hard and it's painful to talk about these things. And there's something on the other side of it as we do. And that's the joy, right? That's the recovery. And so being able to explore different things around loss and how you've dealt with it, like education almost your as well. Like that's an action to just educate yourself around grief, um, and what is good ways to be with people and what might not be so helpful. All of that to me is action.
I appreciate you naming that, like just this reminder that there are helpful, supportive ways to be with people in their grief, in their sorrow, and there are unhelpful and unsupportive ways. And I think for many of us who perhaps were modeled more unhelpful ways, we never had something different modeled, like I think it could be really helpful if you could share, what are some helpful ways to be with perhaps first ourselves so we can do our own work. And then with those, like our audience are service providers and givers. And so we're absolutely the ones who are going to be kind of susceptible and really have that predisposition to want to support others through their pain. Um, and for many of us, like, what if we never had that modeled for us?
Yeah, as many of us don't have it modeled. So for me, for others, it's the listening, right? Without judgment and just truly being that heart with ears for others. Growing up, you think about when others were grieving. I know for me, I would immediately go in and get a hug. And it was really for me, like you talk about the uncomfortableness of being with people with grief. And that would stop the emotion that they had, or it might even stop them from talking, right? So just allowing them to be and giving them space. Like some people will pat you on the back or touch you on the knee or even hand you a tissue, which I don't do anymore, which some people are like, ooh, that seems like not polite. Like that's not what I was raised to do. And to me, it's like if you're handing somebody a tissue in their grief, you're saying, don't feel bad. Like tears are wrong. And so learning how to just be with them and let them have their emotion and listen is really important. And understanding too with others that all unique grief or all loss is unique to the person. So my loss of my mom might be different, very different from someone else's loss of their mother and their relationship to their mother. So, when you share things of, oh, well, at least you had your mother for so many years or something, like that stuff is not helpful, but it's what, society we say, like, oh, well, at least she died peacefully, or at least, and to that person, it's like, yeah, they died peacefully and they're still gone and they still have feelings around that loss. It's really, for others, it's just taking the action of being with and holding that space.
Yeah. I'm I really am resonating with all of this. And I'm actually thinking of um, someone close to me who had a loss in their family recently. Um, and I went to offer my condolences, and the response was, "Thank you." And I know it's okay. And, um, and my heart went out to them because I could sense their kind of inability, their unwillingness to kind of feel that sadness and grief. And I just felt called to respond in the moment, no, it's not okay. And I'm here.
Mhm.
And I'm imagining that that may be the case for a lot of our listeners, that they actually might perceive or sense others' kind of unwillingness or resistance to feel their emotions or feel their sorrow. And for empaths in particular, that is so hard to be
Mhm.
with. So hard to be with people you love who um, are hurting and can't hurt or won't let
Mhm.
themselves hurt. So, oh, gosh, I'm even tearing up saying it. Like, how do we, as space holders and loving presences, um, what else is there for us to do? What other action is, if any, for us to take?
I think too, for the thoughts of, I can't imagine what you're going through, and offering that to them, because even again, back to the mother situation, it's very different, their mother, my mother, and I can't imagine what they're going through, and so giving them, that opening to feel what they feel. And even in sense of, when you hear something that they're sharing, you might offer, oh, um, did that make you feel overwhelmed? Or, you might put in something as a question versus like a statement of, oh, was that, terrible? And what was it, And so that it might open up more of them to be able to share more, and silence is not the worst thing either. I think it makes us uncomfortable. And I know it used to make me very uncomfortable, because grievers too, the loss of focus and the concentration isn't there when you're grieving. Um, and so their minds are all over the place, and that's normal and natural for that to happen. Um, and so I think that just loving them, listening to them, I think about people that say, oh, I should be, like in my story, like I should be better. 17 years have passed, but even if it's 3 years or 4 years, they always like, we are the worst critics on ourselves in grief as well. And so just giving them that compassion of, you are where you are, and it's okay to have any feeling at every time. It's not linear. Like it comes up and it happens. And so I hope I'm answering your questions, but I feel like that is a good way, to really be with somebody and acknowledge them and just have that open space for them to share what they need to share.
Mm-hmm. No, you're offering so many helpful nuggets, and I think the things I'm taking away are just the reminder that so often when we're trying to be with someone in their pain, we're perhaps trying to fix it or make them feel better because we're uncomfortable. And really starting there and acknowledging our own discomfort and maybe even communicating it,
Yes.
putting it
Yes.
on loudspeaker, sharing it, letting it be in the space versus um, be the space you swim in,
Mm-hmm.
can be. I'm hearing that as a place to lean into. Something I talk about with my clients a lot is like the idea, the invitation to check your assumptions, like just checking in if something is helpful or supportive, or, would they like a tissue, or would
Mm-hmm.
that be a distraction, rather than deciding for them what they need or how they need to take care of themselves in their moment.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yes. Just like, would you like a hug? Giving them the option, because some people, they're not huggers. I mean, you might be close to the person and know, but yeah, I think that is just beautiful.
Something this just feels like a side note, but I run masterminds. I love groups, which is why I always love hearing about other people's experience with groups. And there's often these moments in the group where there's this like kind of feeling of discomfort, this just like wave of discomfort in the group. And I always feel kind of like compelled to just like expel that energy.
Mhm.
And I have learned like to just own, hey, I need to do this. Feel free to join me in a deep breath if it would be supportive for you. And this is for me.
Taking care of yourself. Yes.
And not deciding for other people what
Right.
they need or how they're feeling. And I'm just hearing kind of so much of the work that we can do to make grief a more welcomed topic, to be
Mm-hmm.
shared with our loved ones, and to be trusted in our communities, is to speak from our own experience,
Mm-hmm.
to ask consent, and to
Yes,
bring curiosity versus knowing,
exactly. And to just be that heart with ears
to be that
and
heart with
listen.
ears.
Yeah, it's so simple, and it's challenging for us because we're not, you don't grow up like that.
Well, I actually, that's where I'd love to go next, because as we're this whole conversation, as we were speaking, I'm thinking about myself as a highly sensitive, intuitive empath, with big feelings. I have always had big feelings, um, and I know many of our listeners have them as well. And I think that for many of us with big feelings, it made our caretakers uncomfortable growing up. So uncomfortable that, to your words, to use your words, they wanted us to feel better. They tried to fix our feelings, our pain, our sadness, our sorrow, whatever it was, small or big. And I think that for many of us, the consequence of that was that we learned that it was not safe to share our feelings because,
Mhm.
we know that when we fix other people's feelings, it makes it less safe to trust other people with them, makes us less inclined to share those feelings the next time we have a moment or the next time we're wanting to lean in and be vulnerable. And I've noticed in my work that one of the consequences of that over time, like one of the learned consequences of becoming disconnected with your feelings, is that they eventually come out. And when they do come out, after having not come out for a
Mhm.
very long time, they often come out unintentionally or irresponsibly or as attacks or um, breakdowns, so much so that I think many of us learn to be scared of our emotions because of how other people responded to them, how other people couldn't be with them because we um, became disconnected from feeling our feelings so much so that they kind of ruled us. And so I'm really appreciating this conversation and how the path is through. And for those of us who um, perhaps don't have a lot of practice in sharing our feelings consistently, intentionally, purposefully, in a kind of safe way, I'm just imagining that this conversation could feel really scary, could feel really out of reach. And so, where's a place to begin?
I go to the um,
I'm
starting
appreciating your smile too, by the way.
with, well, I go
A
to
big
starting
question.
with that question that you probably get asked a lot during the day, which is, how are you doing? Whether it's at the grocery store or whether, you come home from work and your partner says, how was your day? And you say, it was fine. Everything's fine, or going through the grocery store, how are you? I'm great. How are you? And that, I think we're practiced in lying, like you said. Like, we're not all great. It's not all fine. Like, things happen and you have feelings about them. And so I think I want to say small practice in a way would be to start being honest and answering honestly to those questions throughout the day. Um, and asking uh, maybe more open-ended questions so that people don't have to lie to you back. Like, because the how are you doing to a lot of people, whether they're depressed or anxious, like, that's a big question, right? And they're probably not going to answer it honestly. Um, And so, not giving that you have to say everything about all your feels, in the workplace or whatever, but you could just say, hey, I'm doing a lot better than I was yesterday. Like, yesterday was a tough day, or whatever you want to say. But at least that's becoming more honest with yourself about, it's not fine, it's not good today, and it's okay not to be always fine and good.
I think that is such an important reminder. I love that's where you went with the question because it's so true. Like it's just starting with those simple questions, those simple ways in which we become disconnected or dishonest with ourselves and with others. Like how are we really disconnecting moment to moment? I mean, I know for me, my probably like the first 3 years into my coaching relationship, I had a practice of a post it note in multiple areas of my apartment and home. Like, what are you feeling in this moment? It's a practice to this day I offer to clients all the time as an invitation to connect more routinely with their own interior world to to be able to communicate more authentically with their external one. So thank you for that. And honestly, it feels really timely, because I think that we're living in a world that's grieving right now, and there's so much pain and hardship and fear and sorrow in our wake. And I think so many of us are just being fine about it because we don't know how to process and share, and we don't have safe places to practice in.
I love how you ask how you're feeling in this moment too, because it's so important, right? Because people tend to go, I'm having a bad day. So therefore, it's the day where you're breaking it down and say, okay, what about just right now? Because we don't know, and our feelings are like a roller coaster. So I love that.
I'm mindful of the time, and I'm just noticing I'm wanting to know if there's anything you're wanting to share. If there's anything you're wanting to share about this topic that I haven't perhaps thought to ask you.
I'm trying to think if there's anything. I mean, there's so much on this topic that, it's one of the things I never thought I would be sharing about. If I look back on my journey, I was like, oh no, that's not anywhere I would go with that. But now it's like you said, the world needs more healing, more compassion, more hearts with ears, and just allowing people to loving people through it and allowing people to just be where they are in all their emotions, and being there for people in the emotions. So, there is recovery. And I think that is just, for me, was such an aha moment in my world, that it's possible to actually truly find that joy.
Well, this feels like a really timely conversation, and I really appreciate you for coming on today to have it with me. I lost someone dear to me in just the last couple of days, and another family member lost someone dear to her, and so divinely timed, Jen. And as we wrap today, I'd love to invite you to share what supported you in becoming the prosperous empath that you are. It's a question I invite all my guests to share.
I would say the biggest support for me is other people, like other people within my journey that are allowing me the support, the love, the care that I need to just be me. And that's all that I need to do in my business, in my world. I think that, yeah, that feelings are okay. And like, I feel like I'm very much that person that lives, to heal and help others, but that it's available to me too. And I think I wouldn't have known that if I didn't have the support from others. And you have to ask for it, right? Like you have to get that support as well. And so I think that I wouldn't want it any other way than to be that sensitive person, to be that person that goes into the heartfelt space and to really love people and connect with people on a different level than the world is.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.